right. The next couple of questions I have are both from my co-host as well. And they are along the same lines. So I'm gonna start with a preface, right? So there've been segments on John Oliver's show last week tonight. There's been, whether it's tweets from activists on the ground or just other things that we see on the news, that give the sense that police departments around the country have been sort of militarized. So the first question that comes from Zeus is, how do you respond to the idea that the militarization of police has the effect of exacerbating a precarious situation as opposed to actually de-escalating that situation?
Okay.
So.
Let me answer your question with the question. Do you want me to address like specifically when it comes to like civil unrest with the protests that we've seen, or just like in general?
Well, I think the most pressing thing at the moment is the civil unrest. So,
okay.
So let's go at it from that angle.
Okay. So, and I've had this discussion with a couple of friends. Okay, so part of the problem, and there's valid points on I think both sides of the aisle, is that part of the problem is when you've got a protest going on, it's every American's First Amendment right to, freedom of assembly, freedom of speech. Most people get it wrong, and they think, if a private institution restricts their freedom of speech, like, oh, you're violating my First Amendment right, when really the First Amendment is talking about Congress and government agencies. So as law enforcement, it is not my right to restrict anybody's freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, anything like that, right? So a big crowd of 5,000 people gathering because they want to protest an unjust killing of a Black man, that's fine. Part of the problem, though, is that when you get a crowd that big, now you do have to start thinking about, okay, well, we've got to maintain control of this crowd. We've got to, I know people say that, oh, it's just property when a riot breaks out. But, there are business owners. Not every business that gets looted is owned by a major corporation. Some of these are, even if they're not quite quote unquote mom and pop shops, some of these are businesses that aren't necessarily owned by millionaires or owned by people that can just, okay, I can just write the losses off by losing that store and I'm going to be okay. So as law enforcement, we do have a duty to keep the crowd under control, make sure we do protect property, and at the same time, protect people. When you get a huge crowd of people, even if you're not worried about necessarily property, you got to worry about, is someone getting trampled under a crowd if the crowd starts running one way? You got to think, okay, are there counter protesters out here that don't like the message that these protesters are talking about? Are they going to try to rile something up? And now you've got a crowd, now you've got brawls breaking out. So part of the issue with civil unrest and why you see some of the tactics deployed that you do is just, it's much easier to keep things under control it's what we call officer presence. There's a use of force, they call it a continuum, but they're kind of getting away from calling it a use of force continuum. But part of that is officer presence. I'll give you an example of that. If you get pulled over on the side of the road and the cop comes out, and I'm not saying that you would like try to do anything, but if the cop comes out and he walks up to your window, his uniform has got nice creases in it, it's pressed, he works out, is in shape, he just looks like, Captain America, you're going to be like, oh man, this guy, even if you're not like a criminal, it's like, oh man, I want to try to do something. Even if you're just like, oh man, I got stopped, you're going to look at him and go, oh man, this guy, that's a professional guy. Like, you're going to probably have a pretty good interaction with him. Whereas if it's someone else that, pants untucked, uniform's got crumbs on it because he just ate his lunch in his car or something like that, you as a person, you're going to look at that and you're not going to be impressed by that guy. It's the same sort of thing when you talk about civil unrest. Is you want to project that strength, so that way you kind of, if there are troublemakers in the crowd, you kind of project that strength that, hey, we're here, we're ready to respond if you try anything.
It serves as a deterrent,
yeah. And I get the other side of the argument that say, well, you know, these protests are peaceful and the cops are escalating things. But one thing that you got to understand is that anytime there's civil unrest, people are talking about it somewhere, whether it's on social media, through groups, whatever. And most of the time, all the ones that I've responded to, we've had intel on specific groups of troublemakers in the crowd and specific people that, whether it's been on social media or in meetings, they didn't know they were talking to an undercover officer or whatever. They were like, hey, we're going to do this, this, and this. So part of that intimidation strategy, that deterrent, is because we know for a fact that there are some people in the crowd that are planning on doing something. But the problem is, when you get these large crowds, you don't know who it is. You know who it is, but you don't know where they are all the time. You know, a lot of the time you're looking,
needle in the haystack,
trying to find that needle in the haystack. And, you know, it could take one person that says, you know what, I want to rile this crowd up. And he just going from person to person. Maybe this is someone that he doesn't even know, and he's just talking to them and they're getting more angry. Then he goes and talks to someone else and they're getting more angry. And it just sort of spreads to the point that now you've got a whole crowd that's angry. Everybody wants, you know, they want revenge or they want payback, or, you know, oh, let's, you know, we need to make our message heard. Talking's not enough. And now you've got a crowd of, I used 5,000 before, but let's even a crowd of 200 to 300. 300 people, 300 angry people can do a lot of damage to property. And there's a lot of risk for them for someone to inadvertently get hurt. And like I said, then you've also got to worry about a counter protester coming with a group. Now you've got, let's say someone doesn't like the message that's being protested. He comes with 5 or 6 of his buddies. They start brawling, 5 or 6 of them against 10 or 20 people. Now you've got to worry about, okay, now there's a huge brawl. Part of, like I said, part of the, what I guess is perceived as that militaristic response is, like I said, when you get large groups of people together, it becomes a whole lot more chaotic and it's much more difficult to control. Think about this. If you saw 3 people fighting in a bar, you by yourself wouldn't jump in there, right? If you had like 5 or 6 people, like, oh man, someone's getting hurt, and you guys all, like 2 of you jumped on one person and pulled people apart like that, and you had more numbers than them, it's like, oh man, we got to break this up, someone's going to get hurt. You're going to need more numbers or something. Like, if people are just brawling and fighting and you try to go in with the same level of force that they're using or less, there's more chance for you to get hurt. There's more chance for the situation to spiral out of control. So that's kind of the rationale by why you see these responses that, once again, I understand where people are coming from, that it says, oh man, why do you need all that? Why do you need all that? And 90% of the time, it's not for the whole crowd. It's because they know there's someone in the crowd that wants things to go bad. So you've got to have your element in the area so that you can keep things under some measure of control. Yeah, it's tough because, like I said, as law enforcement, we can't restrict anyone's freedom to assemble, anyone's freedom to protest. But at the same time, we do have a duty to protect lives, protect property. And once again, like, even a group of 50 people that want to, you know, do 50 people can do some damage, whether it's to property or if they decide, oh, this guy's not one, and they start jumping. So, you know, there's a lot that can go wrong. So most of the time when it comes to civil unrest, seconds, minutes count. So the quicker you can respond with whatever you need to, it helps keep things somewhat under control. I'm not going to say completely under control, because we've seen plenty of videos where it's like, even with the police response there, things are still getting out of control. And I think, I don't know, I think part of that is just due to poor tactics, poor planning, poor anticipation of where problems might occur. Because if you, like I said, you have that large element of response there as a deterrent, it helps you kind of identify, okay, you know, these guys are good. They're over here. They're listening to the speaker talk. But this guy over here, he's, you know, every person he talks to, he's like, you know, getting riled up or whatever, you know, something. And you kind of got to pay attention to that sort of stuff. But then again, he may be fine too. He may just be very passionate. He may be angry and have no intention of doing anything. So it's dynamic, it's fluid. It's something where you've got to be ready to respond with the highest force that you need to, but at the same time, you've got to have that restraint to know, okay, we don't need this response. We don't need to respond with that. It's definitely one of those catch-22s because, like I said, it's easier to keep things under control, or it's better to regain control if you've got things in place, as opposed to, okay, you know, these guys want to protest, you know, we'll just have a couple lines of officers here. You know, we're not going to have the guys in the riot gear. We're not going to have that. But then if things do go bad, now you've got to wait 15, 20 minutes for the guys in the riot gear or whoever else to get there. And now things have already spiraled out of control at that point. And it's one of those things where, like I said, it's a catch-22, but it kind of is what it is.
Yeah, I mean, if it were simple, we wouldn't need to have this conversation.
Exactly.
Yeah.
If it were simple, we'd be talking about our 5 favorite superhero movies.
Right, exactly. So, along the lines of the, you know, militarization, quote unquote, of the police, what are your thoughts on defund the police? Right, defund the police is the term that we've been hearing a lot over the last couple of months. What do you think about the term? What do you think the goal of the defund the police movement is, and what do you think about whether that goal is feasible, whether it makes sense? Just you know, elaborate as much as you want.
I think they need a better slogan because, and I know I've seen a lot of people say, when we say defund the police, we don't mean no police, we mean, and then they'll list their specific goals. And it's almost like defund the police is the shock word that they want to grab your attention. And then here's where the list of goals. I think the problem with that is defund the police turns a lot of people off. You have someone like me that sees that and I'm like, what do you mean defund the police? You know, there's a very specific need for police in society. You need law enforcement. Congress, all right, so Congress is the legislative branch. They write the laws, right? You've got the Supreme Court is the judicial branch. They interpret the laws. Law enforcement falls under the executive branch, which means enforcing the laws. So if you removed police and you're like, okay, Congress has written the laws, the judicial branch interprets the law, who's there to enforce the law? So when I see something like defund the police, my immediate thought was, you're crazy. Like, we can't get rid of the law. We can't get rid of, like, how are laws gonna, you know, be enforced? You know, there's plenty of laws that people are like, well, these laws don't need to be enforced. And there's plenty where people are like, okay, yeah, we need, you know, there's plenty of laws where if it happened to someone's brother or mother or sister, the first person they're calling is probably 911, unless they're, you know, in the hood and they just feel like they need to grab their gun and go do something about it themselves, right? But
I just want to jump in real quick on that. You mentioned the error in using the term defund the police because it puts off people like yourself being in law enforcement and people who generally don't want to live in a state of anarchy. But you know, I've looked into it. Zeus has looked into it, and I want to list a couple of things that I found and he found while looking into it, and get your thoughts on whether these things make sense, whether there's a way they can be tweaked and such. So one of the things is they're calling for diverting some of the funds intended for some of these militaristic police equipment, you know, to keep on that same wavelength. Diverting some of those funds towards, you know, psychologists / psychiatrists that work in tandem with first responders to attend to issues that police are not typically trained for.
Mhm.
One such example that comes to mind readily is what happened to Elijah McClain in
Mhm.
Aurora, Colorado. I think, and I may be wrong, but I do believe that they say he was on the autism spectrum,
I believe
and
so.
yeah, and that kind of affected his ability to comply to, to what the police officers were telling him in a suitable way, if you will.
Yep.
And rather than having police deal with that, because they're there to stop crime and um, to protect people against dangerous people, but they're not. And please correct me if I'm wrong, but to my knowledge, they're not trained to deal with those kind of events. So the defund the police movement is talking about diverting some funds to those people who are trained to deal with that. What do you think about that? About moving some of those to there and not taking away
So
from police pay, right?
yeah. You
Yeah,
know, no. I get what you're saying. And once again, if this were simple, we probably wouldn't be talking about this. It would just already be in place.
right.
Um, the not so dirty little secret about law enforcement, and you can look up articles on it, is, people see all the equipment and the stuff, and like, oh man, they've got so much money to, just buy all these toys and gadgets and stuff. A lot of it is stuff that's been accrued over years or over a long period. I can go ahead and guarantee you that most of the like fancy gadgets and stuff that my agency's got, it's stuff that was like, we got, hey, we've got an extra one. Okay, we'll take it. Like it's not something that was in the fund. And I don't know where. I know I don't work with our budget people or anything like that, and I don't know like where our money's going in our department. But I can go ahead and tell you that before I got to my department, there was a lengthy stretch where, because of a shortfall of money, none of the employees got a raise, and we're supposed to get a yearly, a performance. You do your yearly performance evaluation, and you get your step raises, which I know a lot of other companies do as well. Are we
Okay,
back?
can
Yeah,
you hear me?
we're back.
Yeah, I'll just edit out that part. But I heard everything you said about the annual
Yeah,
step
yeah.
raises,
So
and there was a freeze for a
yeah,
period of time.
so it was right just a few years before I got hired that even people that had been there for 10, 15 years started getting their raises back. So the not so dirty little secret about law enforcement is that it appears they're overfunded, but most agencies are operating below budget or under what they feel they need. And there's actually an article that I was in a training class last week that all of us agreed was pertinent. It was written in like 2011, I want to say. And we were like, man, this still applies today. Is that one of the biggest problems is that when the money gets tight, uh, a lot of agencies, the first thing in the budget that starts getting slashed is training. So instead of officers getting extra training on things that would probably prevent a lot of these excessive uses of force or unjust shootings, instead of getting the training that would help prevent that, now the agency just says, okay, if we have everybody go down to the minimum standard, and then it's just on the officer to get whatever extra training they can when they can. If we've got some money for it, we'll bring in some extra training. So for me, one of my personal opinions is that there's not enough training, but that also brings up a very important question. I was like, okay, we'll do more training, but now how does that training get paid for? Does that mean that you're going to bring officers in on their off day? Okay, that's fine, but now you've got to pay them overtime, and you've got to pay whoever's doing the training. You've got to pay for that. It's like, okay, well, we won't do that. We'll have officers come in. We'll just have them do it on the day that they work. Well, then that means we've got to take people off their normal duty and try to rotate it. So it comes with its own set of issues. Now, as
So,
far as, go ahead.
sorry, I was just gonna ask. So, you say the funds aren't there for enough training. So, if the funds are made available for for the training to handle like the situation that I mentioned before with Elijah McClain, or training programs. And these are just things that I've read up on as it relates to defund the police, right? If the funds are available for that kind of training, or training aimed at improving the the community outreach by
Yeah,
police departments,
community relations, yeah.
right, or other programs aimed at reducing recidivism rates, right? People just getting out of jail and then getting back in, because they can't get a step up. Do you
I
feel
got
like,
strong opinions on recidivism, but that's we'll approach that later.
right? Do you feel like funds being made available for that would have a positive effect? It feels like an obvious question, but
no, I get what you're saying, and I feel like it would. Now, you said, there's not always training for officers to deal with the sort of situation that, well, it was Elijah McClain, right? Yeah, that situation. I know with my department, I know in Georgia, it's mandated through Georgia Post, which is Peace Officer Standards and Training Council, that you've got to take de-escalation every year. You've got to take mental health, and most agencies do require you to take some sort of class on dealing with mentally challenged individuals, just because those situations can be so dynamic where you're dealing with someone, they may not be able to respond to your commands or your directions the same way that you or I could. But at the same time, a lot of agencies, they do the minimum requirement that the state requires, and then they don't require the officers or deputies or whoever in their agencies to do more. I think it would help, but I'm not opposed to the idea of more money going to psychologists or whoever to accompany police officers or something like that to help in those situations. I'm going to go ahead and be blunt with you. I'm a bit, well, I don't know, maybe times are changing now, but I am still a little pessimistic about that, because Georgia is one state that I can speak on just from my 3 years in law enforcement. I've seen this to be true. I pretty much know this to be true. Or I'll ask you a question. Can you name a free mental health hospital in Georgia, like one that is provided by the state to take in people with mental health issues, or anything like that? If you were diagnosed with schizophrenia tomorrow and needed to be hospitalized, like, where could you go?
Well, it's a bit of a gotcha question, because I can't name a single mental health hospital.
But there's a reason for that.
Well, yeah, well, I was going to say, I take that to mean that they don't exist, the free mental health clinics.
Basically, Georgia no longer has, hospitals that are, funded by the state or funded by the government to take in the mentally ill. Now, there may still be a couple operating, but what ends up happening with the vast majority of the mentally ill is they commit some sort of crime and then they get brought to jail. There are some places that we can send them to try to get them some help. We have counselors. I know in my sheriff's office, we've got a full mental health staff that tries to help these people, get them, medicated if that's what they need, get them counseling, therapy, whatever they need. But in Georgia, it's fallen on the jails, and the mental health issue has fallen on the jails and the prisons, because if you try to go to a private institution, it's going to cost your firstborn child to pay for treatment or whatever it is you need. And there's no, like I said, there's no state-run hospitals or state-run programs that deal specifically with keeping, a lot of people that end up in jail because they have mental health issues. It's because they committed a crime, but it's not because they wanted to commit a crime. They just happened to commit a crime, but the underlying issue is some sort of mental health issue that's not being addressed. And unfortunately, in Georgia, it's fallen on the jails, and the prisons are the ones that now has to house these individuals and kind of get them whatever help they need to get them back into society. But even then, once they're back into society, there's really, not a whole lot of resources that, I mean, if you got the money to pay for it, if you got the money for it, you can pay for anything. But you're talking about people that are a lot of times homeless, don't have the best relationship with their families. You may have someone that their family disowned them because they found, oh, you've got that. Oh no, we can't have that. I'm like, you're no son of mine, and no son of mine is going to be, some freak with schizophrenia or bipolar, or whatever it may be. So you're talking about people that really do need help from the state or from the government to be able to function in society. But in Georgia, we really don't have any we don't have like a major program anywhere that I know of. Like I said, I know there's, like our agency, we work with some local places as far as trying to get people in, what's it, Narcotics Anonymous. We work with some places to try to get people help as we can. But like I said, there's no overarching program from the state that says, okay, here's what we're going to do to keep these mentally ill people that really don't belong in jail out of jail. It just, they're out on the street, something happens and they happen to break a law. So now the jail and prison system has to deal with them. So if we were going to defund the police and put that money into anything, I would say rather than, I don't know, I'd have to look, because I've seen some things where they say, have psychiatrists respond to domestics and counselors and things like that. I would say rather than that, let's put, let's open some state-run hospitals or some sort of programs that makes it so we don't have so many mentally challenged people that, end up committing petty crimes. Someone, is shoplifting or is trespassing because they don't know what year it is. They don't know who they are. They don't recognize you when you walk up to them and you just introduce yourself to them, 5 minutes ago. That person doesn't belong in jail. They need help. Unfortunately, the way things are now, if they commit a crime, the police are going to get called, and the police are going to have to, if a crime has occurred, the police are going to take them into custody. So if I was to get on any soapbox, if I was to say we're going to defund the police, I'd say, okay, if we're going to defund it, then we need to address the social issue, which is much larger than just we've got too many guys with badges and guns that want to be tough guys, which, there are a lot of those. I'm not even going to act like there's not, because there's plenty. But I think it's a much larger societal issue that, at least in Georgia, we don't have the resources. We don't have mental health resources in Georgia. If you don't have the money, there's not a whole lot.
I do want to say, I want to remain objective, as the interviewer, but based off of what you're saying, though, I do want to add a bit of an editorial piece, which is to say, perhaps maybe defunding the police, rather than that being the strategy, perhaps federal intervention is required to divert funds from overbloated programs into programs across the states, across the nation, where there is underfunding for these mental health
resources
and all that stuff. Because one thing about the way this country is set up, it's the USA is one nation. However, you've got like 50 different ways of doing a certain thing, right?
Yeah.
And some do it a lot better than others. And there's some situations that are so pervasive throughout the nation that perhaps it shouldn't be left to the states to deal with that, especially when one is falling as short as it sounds Georgia is. Perhaps that's one of the situations where the federal government should say, hey, we're going to allot all these funds for mental health care across the nation. It shouldn't be a burden on the state budget. And it certainly shouldn't be a burden on the state's ability to enforce the law and such. So that's just my little editorial. Obviously, I can't write anything into law. We can only talk about it and hopefully get opinions.
And honestly, I think that would be great if something like that were to happen, because I don't think Georgia's the only state where that's the case. I'm only speaking on Georgia because I know that's the issue in Georgia, but I've heard in other states it's a similar thing.
I wouldn't be surprised.
but yeah, that like I feel like that would be the best thing is if federally they mandate, okay, this much money is going to every state to take care of the mentally challenged or whatever term you want to use. I'm trying to make sure I don't use the wrong term. I was like, okay, I think mentally challenged is an acceptable term.
I think this is still acceptable. It's okay. September 2nd, 2020. So if he uses a term that's no longer acceptable when you watch this, that's why. Okay, but yeah, that was a good discussion on that point.
Yeah. Can I add one more thing real quick?
Yes. Yeah.
It's very interesting that you talked about how we are one nation, but really we're 50 different states. I had a conversation with someone the other day, and she didn't realize that when it comes to law enforcement, there is no national body that governs law enforcement in each state. I'm not sure if you were aware of that. So
I was not.
Yeah. So I mentioned Peace Officer Standards and Training Council in Georgia. That's what we have in Georgia. Most states have their version of that, but there is no national. There's no national organization that says, okay, if you want to have Peace Officer Standards Training Council and you want to call yourself that, you've got to abide by these standards. There's no national standard. So what that means is if I were to move out of Georgia, even though I'm a post-certified officer for the state of Georgia, I have to receive my post-certification. If I were to move to another state, I'd have to receive it from that state. Some states, they require you to go back through the academy. Some states, they just will look at your experience. They'll look at the size of the department you worked in, and they may say, okay, your department experience is good. We just need you to pass the test on our state's laws and our state's criminal procedure, and then you can enforce the law in our state. But once again, it's different from state to state. Each state has its own state legislator, right? So the criminal code in Georgia is not going to be the same as the criminal code in Minnesota, where George Floyd was killed. The criminal code in Georgia is not the same as the criminal code in Florida. And then on top of that, even within the states, you have you've got your counties, and one thing that people don't realize is the power of the county sheriff. Because the sheriff is a constitutional officer, he's elected every 4 years. The sheriff in any given county is the chief law enforcement officer in that county. So if you live in a county that's got a county police department, if the sheriff decides, hey, I want to take over, doing this sort of investigation, or the sheriff says, hey, if there's a high profile murder or something in the county and the sheriff says, hey, I want my guys to handle it, the sheriff can do that because he's a constitutionally elected officer. Most county PDs or PDs like that, they are appointed by, if you're in a county, the county commissioners, or if you're in a small town or a small city, by the mayor and the city council. So for a county, you've got the sheriff who kind of, what he says as far as how you're going to enforce the law in that county, for the deputies in that county, it goes. If you don't have a county PD, then that means when you dial 911, if the sheriff deputies show up, it's basically his word is how the law is being enforced. To speak on that as well, each county elects a district attorney, a solicitor, whatever, and they're the ones that actually prosecute and choose to, pursue judicial action when someone is arrested. They choose to pursue judicial action or they choose not to. Depending on who your DA is, I mentioned that where I work, we've got a DA that if a police officer does something wrong, he is very willing to prosecute. And then if we talk about Ahmaud Arbery and something happens in, what was that, Brunswick, Georgia?
Brunswick, I believe.
You had the DA. Now, I don't have anything against the first DA recusing themselves because they're like, this guy worked in my office. They just recused themselves to remove any sense of
conflict of interest.
The second DA eventually did that, but what I disagreed with was his statement that I don't even remember the guys' names. I don't make it a point to remember. I remember the victims. I don't make it a point to remember the perpetrators. I can't even remember.
Yeah, I don't remember. Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter what the names are.
But he wrote that letter saying that he felt that what they did was justified, and I think you saw my post on Facebook about it, where I was like, the only thing that was justified is that Ahmaud Arbery felt threatened because some guys rolled up on him in a pickup truck. They weren't uniformed police officers, and they got out of their truck with a shotgun. He obviously felt threatened, and that's why, you know, and then we saw the video and found out the details that they'd been chasing him through the neighborhood. He's freaking exhausted at that point and knows he's not going to be able to outrun them. And he realizes, at least the way I'm looking at it, is that, okay, these guys have been chasing me. They've got a shotgun. I can't outrun a shotgun. My best option is to try to get it from them, you know, try to fight somehow. So to me, for them to say, oh, it was self-defense, he was going after my gun, I'm like, but you created the situation by look at any person. If you're jogging in your neighborhood and you notice the same car is following you, and it's still following you, and then the person pulls up, cuts you off while you're running, and gets out of their car with a gun, like, who's not going to take that as a threat? But you see that DA, he said he felt like they did, you know, the right thing. And I can't speak on what his motivating factors were, other than, you know, what most people have already said. And I don't know, he may be the type of DA that says, you know what, these guys know the law. They were former law enforcement, so obviously they wouldn't do anything wrong. I'm not going to prosecute them. Whereas you have the DA where I work that says, okay, these guys know the law. They wouldn't do anything wrong, but I'm still going to investigate it and make sure they didn't do anything wrong. And if they did, I'm going to hold them accountable for that, as opposed to a DA that says, nah, these guys are good. They know their stuff. We're not going to pursue it. So it's kind of, even within your state, like I said, you've got your DA, you've got your sheriff. So it's not even within the same state. It's not always going to be, you're not going to see the same law is not going to be enforced and practiced the same way.
Right.
Because once again, there's no overarching national standards to it.
And not the same level of accountability and such.
Yeah.
Just to close on that subject, the shooter, or the one who fatally shot Ahmaud Arbery, was Travis McMichael. His father,
oh yeah, that's right,
is Gregory McMichael, and then the guy who filmed the video is William Roddy Bryan. If you choose to remember their names.
I'll probably forget it again in like 30 minutes.
Yeah.